The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Astor Hotel cast a warm, golden glow over the assembled elite, a glittering sea of wealth and power that had gathered to celebrate my 45th birthday. In the world of New York's upper crust, my parties were the stuff of legend, a spectacle of excess that served a dual purpose: to display my dominance and to remind the city's underworld that my reach extended into every corner of legitimate society. But tonight, as I stood on the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom, I felt a familiar prickle at the back of my neck, the same instinct that had kept me alive through decades of bloodshed and betrayal. Something was wrong. I watched my fiancée, Celeste Fairchild, descend the sweeping staircase in a gown that cost more than most people's homes, her arm linked with Dimitri Volkov, the eldest son of the Russian syndicate that had been circling my territory like wolves hungry for a kill. She smiled at me, a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I realized with a jolt that I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen genuine warmth in her gaze. We were playing a game, the two of us, a dance of power and convenience that had somehow become a sham engagement. But tonight, the mask was slipping. "Darling," she purred, releasing Dimitri's arm to approach me, her fingers trailing across my lapel. "Enjoying your party, everyone is so eager to congratulate you on another year of dominance." The word was laced with sarcasm, a subtle blade that only I could detect. I smiled back, a cold, calculated expression that I'd perfected over years of dealing with enemies. "I'm always grateful for the company, Celeste. But I'm more interested in what's hidden in the shadows than what's glittering in the light." Her face flickered, a momentary crack in her composure that told me everything I needed to know. She was in on it, whatever it was. My trusted lieutenant, Donato Marchetti, was supposed to be managing the security for the evening, but I hadn't seen him in the last 20 minutes. When I looked for him now, scanning the crowd below, I found only empty space where he should have been standing, his familiar bulk absent from the perimeter near the main entrance. I descended the staircase, a lion among sheep, my presence causing the crowd to part like the Red Sea. Men in $1,000 suits nodded deferentially. Women in designer gowns whispered behind their fans. They all knew who I was, what I'd done to build this empire, and the brutal efficiency with which I'd eliminated every rival who had dared to challenge me. But tonight, I felt something different in the air, something acrid and metallic, like the smell of blood before a wound has been inflicted. It was then that I saw the child. He was small, barely 3 years old, hiding behind a potted palm near the champagne fountain. His mother, Clara, was one of my most trusted household staff, a woman who had tended to my private residence for 5 years with unwavering loyalty and discretion. She had never asked for favors, never sought advancement, never even looked at me with the hungry ambition that I saw in almost every other pair of eyes in this room. She just did her job, and she did it perfectly. Her son, Leo, was with her tonight because she had no one else to watch him, a fact I'd allowed without a second thought. The boy was staring at me with those enormous, dark eyes, his small face pale and pinched with something that looked like terror. I dismissed it at first. Children were often frightened by me, by the quiet intensity one carried like a second skin. But Leo was different. He'd always been curious, fascinated by the grandeur of my home, never shy or fearful when I passed him in the corridors. He would wave his chubby little hand, and I would sometimes pause to pat his head, a small kindness that I allowed myself in a life defined by brutality. But tonight, his fear was different. It was specific, focused. I watched him slip away from his mother's distracted grasp, weaving through the forest of expensive legs and designer hems until he was standing directly before me, his tiny body trembling. Before I could speak, he tugged on the edge of my suit jacket, the gesture so unexpected and innocent that it startled me. The people around us fell silent, shocked by the breach of etiquette, by the audacity of a servant's child approaching the most powerful man in the room. "I see," I said, offering the boy a gentle smile that felt foreign on my face. "And what is it that you see, little one?" He pulled me down, his small hand surprisingly strong on my sleeve, and pressed his mouth to my ear. His breath was warm, his voice a feather-light whisper that cut through the din of the party like a knife. Bad men, he said, his words trembling with a knowledge that no child should possess. They're under the pretty cake. The man with the bumpy face put a clock under it. A scary clock with wires. The world went silent. For a moment, I heard nothing but the roaring of blood in my ears. I pulled back, searching his face, looking for the lie, the childish exaggeration, but there was none. Only absolute, crystalline terror. The man with the bumpy face was Marco, a personal security operative I'd hired 6 months ago, personally vetted by Donato. And the cake, the 10-tiered confection that was the centerpiece of the celebration, had been delivered just hours ago by a catering company that I hadn't personally vetted, because Donato had assured me it was unnecessary. I straightened slowly, my mind already calculating, plotting, reaching the only logical conclusion. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a coordinated coup, a strike at the heart of my empire. And everyone I trusted, everyone I loved, was either a participant or a pawn. "Clara," I said, my voice calm and level, belying the storm raging inside me. "Come here, please." The woman rushed forward, her face a mask of terror at her son's transgression. She began babbling apologies, her hands fluttering uselessly, but I silenced her with a single raised finger. "Take your son," I told her, my voice soft but carrying absolute authority. "Stay close to me. Do not let him out of your sight." Then I raised my head and looked across the room, meeting Celeste's gaze. She was standing with Dimitri Volkov now, her face flushed with what I had mistaken for excitement. Now I recognized it for what it truly was: anticipation. She was expecting a show, a spectacular explosion that would erase me from existence and clear the path for her union with the Volkovs, a merger that would give her everything I had refused to hand over. I smiled at her, the cold, predatory smile that had sent more powerful men than her to their graves. And I reached for the earpiece connected to my private security team, the ones who answered only to me, the ones who were loyal not to Donato's leadership or Celeste's ambition, but to the simple, unbreakable oath they had sworn to me alone. "Execute Protocol Black," I said into the mic, my words barely audible. "Secure all exits. Detain Donato, Marchetti, and Marco. And retrieve the package under the cake." I want it intact. The party was about to end. But for the traitors in my midst, the real reckoning was just beginning. The shift was imperceptible to the untrained eye, a subtle ripple in the fabric of the party that only those who knew how to read the room could detect. But I saw it all, the sudden tension in the shoulders of my loyal men, the way they began to move with a purpose that had nothing to do with socializing. They emerged from the shadows like ghosts, blending into the crowd until they were perfectly positioned, their hands resting near their concealed weapons, their eyes scanning for threats with the cold precision of predators. Donato was the first to realize something was wrong. I watched him from across the room, his face suddenly pale beneath the tan he'd acquired during his recent trip to the Caribbean, a vacation I had paid for as a reward for his years of service. He was speaking with Marco near the service entrance, their heads bent together in a conspiratorial huddle that confirmed every suspicion that had been gnawing at my gut since Leo's whispered warning. When my men began to converge on their position, Donato's eyes snapped up to meet mine across the glittering expanse of the ballroom, and in that moment, I saw the betrayal written in his face, naked and undeniable. He had been with me for 12 years. 12 years of loyalty, of shared blood and sacrifice, of building an empire from the ashes of rival syndicates. He had been my right hand, the man I trusted with my life, the man who knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped me bury them. And now he was standing beside a bomb, talking to the man who had planted it, and I understood with a cold, terrible clarity that the bond between us had been nothing but a lie. "Donato," I said, my voice carrying across the room with the easy authority of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to command attention. The music from the string quartet faltered, the musicians sensing the shift in atmosphere. The guests turned to look at me, then followed my gaze to where Donato stood frozen, his hand inching toward his jacket. "I believe you owe me an explanation." The room held its breath. Celeste's face was a battlefield of competing emotions, fury and fear warring for dominance. The Volkov brothers, flanking her like bodyguards, had gone still, their hands sliding into their pockets with the practiced ease of men who were accustomed to violence. This was the moment I realized when they had planned to spring their trap. The bomb was supposed to go off, chaos would ensue, and in the confusion, they would eliminate me and seize control of my organization. But I had changed the script, and now they were scrambling to adapt. "It's nothing, boss," Donato said, his voice too high, too hurried. "Just a misunderstanding with one of the staff." I was handling it. I began to walk toward him, my steps measured and unhurried, each footfall echoing in the cavernous silence of the ballroom. The crowd parted before me like water, desperate to avoid being caught between me and whatever was about to unfold. Behind me, I heard Clara's soft gasp as she gathered Leo into her arms, pressing his face against her shoulder to shield him from what was coming. The boy was brave. I would give him that. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just watched me with those enormous, knowing eyes as if he understood that something terrible was being set in motion. "I see," I said, stopping 10 feet from Donato, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his hands trembled despite his attempts to control them. "And the device under the cake, is that also a misunderstanding?" The color drained from Donato's face completely. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff, his mind still refusing to accept the reality of the fall. Marco beside him was more composed, his scarred face set in a mask of cold determination, his hand emerging from his jacket clutching a compact pistol that he raised in one fluid motion. It was the last mistake he ever made. The shot came from behind me, clean and precise, delivered by a sniper positioned on the mezzanine who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Marco crumpled to the floor, a neat hole appearing in the center of his forehead, his pistol clattering harmlessly against the marble tiles. The guests screamed, a wave of panic sweeping through the crowd, but my men were already moving, herding the elite toward the exits with efficient brutality, separating them from the Volkovs and Donato, who were now trapped in the center of the room with nowhere to run. Celeste was screaming too, but her screams were different, laced with fury rather than fear. "You crazy bastard," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Volkovs will burn this city to the ground." I laughed, the sound hollow and utterly without humor. "The Volkovs," I repeated, savoring the word as if it were poison on my tongue. "You think they can touch me, Celeste? You think I didn't know about your little alliance? You think I didn't see the way you looked at Dimitri, the way you sold yourself to them for a piece of what I built?" She lunged at me, her claws extended, her carefully constructed composure shattered beyond repair. I caught her wrist before she could make contact, my grip like iron, and I held her there, close enough to feel the heat of her rage, the frantic thrum of her pulse against my fingers. "You are the one thing I actually loved," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her ears. "The one person I thought could never betray me. And you threw it all away for what? Power, money, a seat at a table that will never be yours. Go to hell," she spat, her eyes wild with hatred. "Already there," I replied, releasing her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling into the arms of one of my men. "Take her to the car. I'll deal with her later." Donato was still standing frozen in place, his hands raised in surrender, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. I approached him slowly, savoring the anticipation of what was to come. This was the man who had betrayed me, who had helped orchestrate my death, who had shattered the trust one had foolishly placed in him. 12 years, I said, standing face to face with him. 12 years of blood and loyalty, and this is how you repay me, by letting them use you as a puppet, by selling yourself to the highest bidder. "Boss, you don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "They had my daughter. My little girl. They said they would kill her if I didn't help them. I didn't have a choice." I felt a surge of cold fury, not at Donato but at the Volkovs, at their willingness to drag innocence into their schemes. But the anger was tempered by a grim understanding. I had been in this world long enough to know that family was often the weapon of choice, the pressure point that could break even the most loyal soldier. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where is your daughter?" "Safe," Donato said, his voice trembling with hope. "They promised she would be safe if I did what they asked. But I don't know if I can trust them." Please, boss. Help me find her. Please. I stared at him for a long moment, weighing his words, searching his eyes for any trace of deception. And in the end, I found none. Only the desperate, agonized love of a father who had been pushed to the brink. Get him out of here, I said to my men, gesturing toward the exit. Secure him in the holding room. I'll speak with him later. The holding room was a converted wine cellar beneath the Grand Astor, a space I had personally designed for moments like this, when the truth needed to be extracted from unwilling lips in absolute privacy. The walls were soundproofed, the lighting harsh and unforgiving, and the only furniture was a single steel chair bolted to the floor. Donato sat in it now, his wrists bound behind his back, his face a portrait of ruin. The man who had once commanded respect from every corner of New York's underworld looked small and broken, stripped of the power and authority that had defined his existence. I stood before him, my hands clasped behind my back, my expression carefully neutral. The rage that had consumed me on the ballroom floor had cooled into something more dangerous, a calculated, patient fury that would not be satisfied until I had every piece of the puzzle. The bomb had been disarmed, the Volkovs were in custody, and Celeste was secured in a separate location, but the true threat was still out there, hidden behind layers of conspiracy and deception. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Tell me about your daughter, I said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for the past 5 minutes. Her name is Mia, isn't it? 12 years old. Loves horses. Wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. I remember you telling me about her, back before everything went wrong. Donato's face crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks. Please, he begged, his voice hoarse and ragged. Please don't hurt her. She's just a child. She doesn't know anything about this world. I'm not going to hurt her, I said, and I meant it. But I need you to understand something, Donato. I need you to understand the position you've put me in. You were my most trusted man, my brother in all but blood. And you chose to betray me, to let them use you as a weapon against me. Do you know how that feels? It wasn't a choice, he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. They took her from school. They said they would cut her throat and send me the video if I didn't cooperate. What was I supposed to do? What would you have done? I didn't answer the question because the answer was too complicated, too tangled in the gray morality of the world we inhabited. Instead, I asked the question that mattered most. Who took her? Who is holding her? I don't know, Donato said, his voice cracking. I never met them face to face. Everything was done through intermediaries, burner phones, encrypted messages. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to keep me in the dark. But you know who hired them, I pressed. You know the architect of this conspiracy. Don't lie to me, Donato. Not now. Not when your daughter's life depends on it. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the side, and I saw the conflict playing out behind his gaze. He was still afraid, still protecting the people who had threatened his child. Even now. But he was also a pragmatist, a man who understood that his only hope of saving his daughter lay with me, Celeste, he finally admitted, the name falling from his lips like a curse. She's the one who orchestrated the whole thing. She approached me 6 months ago, told me she was planning to leave you, that the Volkovs would protect her if she helped them take over your organization. She promised me a seat at the table, a position of power in the new regime. And then she told me that I had no choice, because they already had Mia. I absorbed the information with the cold detachment of a man who had long ago learned to compartmentalize his emotions. Celeste, my beautiful, treacherous fiancée, the woman I had planned to marry, to share my life with, to trust with the secrets of my empire. She had been playing me from the very beginning, using my love for her as a weapon against me. The thought was a knife in my gut, twisting with every passing moment. Where is Mia now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Donato repeated, his voice thick with despair. They move her every few days, keep her in different safe houses. The only contact I have is a number that I can use to check on her, but they warn me that if I tried to trace it, they would kill her and make me watch. Give me the number, I said. I have people who can trace it without alerting anyone. I have resources you can't even imagine. Donato looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, fragile hope. You would do that after everything I've done. I studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity of his gratitude against the depth of his betrayal. In the end, I made a decision that surprised even me. You were a good man once, Donato. A loyal man. The man who saved my life in that alleyway in Jersey City. The man who held my hand when I thought I was dying. I'm not going to forget that man, even if you did. He broke down then, sobs racking his body, his shoulders shaking with the force of his grief and regret. I let him cry, standing in silence while he purged the emotions that had been building for months. When he finally calmed, I leaned down and looked him in the eye. I'm going to find your daughter, I said. I'm going to bring her home safe. And then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the future of your employment in my organization. But before that happens, I need you to tell me everything you know about the Volkov's operation. Their safe houses, their contacts, their weaknesses. I need you to give me the tools to destroy them. Anything, Donato said, his voice raw and broken. I'll tell you everything. I swear to God, I'll give you the whole thing. I nodded, satisfied, and gestured for one of my men to bring me a tablet. As Donato began to speak, to unravel the threads of the conspiracy that had nearly cost me everything, I felt a sense of grim purpose settle over me. The betrayal had cut deep, deeper than I wanted to admit. But it had also freed me, cutting the last ties that bound me to the soft comforts of trust and love. I was a weapon again, sharp and deadly, aimed with surgical precision at the heart of my enemies. And I would not rest until every last one of them had been destroyed. The command center was a windowless room buried deep beneath my estate in Westchester, a bunker designed to withstand anything short of a direct nuclear strike. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying feeds from surveillance cameras scattered across the city, each one connected to a network of informants and analysts who worked around the clock to keep me informed of every move my enemies made. It was here that I retreated after my conversation with Donato, surrounded by the cold hum of electronics and the focused silence of my most trusted operatives. The information he had given me was a treasure trove, a roadmap to the Volkov's operations that would take weeks to fully unravel. But the most urgent piece was the number, the lifeline to Mia. I handed it to my lead technical analyst, a woman named Reyes who had been with me for 8 years, her loyalty forged in the fires of countless operations. She took it without a word, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began the painstaking process of tracing the signal through layers of encryption and misdirection. How long? I asked, my voice flat and emotionless. Give me an hour, she replied, not looking up from the screen. Maybe less. They're good, but they're not as good as they think they are. I nodded and turned away, pacing the length of the room while I waited. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the party was fading now, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that I couldn't afford to indulge. There was too much work to be done, too many loose ends to tie up before I could allow myself the luxury of rest. The Volkovs were in custody, but they were only the tip of the spear. The real power behind the conspiracy, the architects of the plot, were still out there, and they would not stop until they had destroyed everything I had built. Reyes let out a low whistle, pulling my attention back to her workstation. Got something, she said, pointing to a blinking dot on the map displayed on her screen. The number pinged off a tower in Red Hook about 30 minutes ago. That's a dead zone, lot of abandoned warehouses and industrial buildings. Perfect place to hide a hostage. Get me a satellite image of the area, I ordered, moving to stand behind her. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. The image materialized on the screen, a grainy overhead shot of the Brooklyn waterfront. Reyes zoomed in on a cluster of buildings near the water's edge, highlighting one in particular. It was an old warehouse, its roof partially collapsed, its windows boarded up. On the surface, it looked abandoned, but there was a newer padlock on the loading bay door, and the tire tracks in the mud suggested recent activity. Send a team to scout the perimeter, I said. Thermal imaging, drones, whatever it takes. But they don't engage until I give the order. We're not going to do anything that could put me at risk. Reyes nodded, already relaying the instructions to the tactical team standing by in the adjacent room. I watched the chaos of activity around me, the coordinated movements of people who had been trained to respond to exactly this kind of crisis, and I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. This was what I had built, an organization that could mobilize with surgical precision, an army of loyal soldiers who would follow me into the heart of darkness. But even as I watched, I couldn't shake the image of Leo's face, the terrified little boy who had risked everything to warn me. He had been so small, so fragile, but there had been a strength in him, a courage that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror every day of my life. His mother, Clara, was still in the estate, being cared for in the guest quarters, her son resting in a bed that was probably the first real bed he'd ever slept in. I had checked on them earlier, found Leo fast asleep with his thumb in his mouth, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of innocent slumber. I had made a decision in that moment. When this was over, when I had crushed every last one of my enemies and secured Mia's safety, I was going to do something I had never done before. I was going to protect them, Clara and Leo, not just as employees but as family. They had earned that place, earned it with a courage that had saved my life and exposed the conspiracy that had been festering in my midst. It was a debt I intended to pay in full. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The tactical team reported back with their initial reconnaissance, confirming that the warehouse was occupied by at least 4 armed men, possibly more. They had spotted a child through a gap in the boarded window, a small figure in a pink dress, confirming that Mia was indeed being held there. The information hit me like a physical blow, a surge of righteous fury that I channeled into cold, strategic thinking. "How do they have her secured?" I asked, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Looks like they're keeping her in an office on the 2nd floor," Reyes reported. "There's a single entrance, a spiral staircase that's easy to defend. The men are scattered throughout the building, but they seem to be rotating their patrols. They're not expecting us, which is our advantage." I nodded, already formulating the plan in my mind.
"We go in at dawn," I said.
3 teams. 1 to secure the perimeter, 1 to take out the hostiles, and 1 to extract Mia. Minimal noise, maximum efficiency. I don't want to give them time to react. "You're going in yourself?" Reyes asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "I am," I said, my tone brooking no argument. "I'm the one who owes this debt. I'm the one who's going to collect." Dawn broke over Red Hook with a gray, muted light that promised rain before the morning was through. I stood in the shadow of a derelict shipping container, my body thrumming with the familiar pre-action tension that had accompanied every major operation of my life. The warehouse loomed before me, a skeletal monument to decay, its rusted metal skeleton silhouetted against the pale sky. Somewhere inside, a 12-year-old girl was waiting to be rescued, her life hanging by a thread that I was determined to sever from her captors. The tactical team was in position, 3 squads of my most elite operatives, men who had been with me through every war, every betrayal, every bloody campaign of retribution. They moved like shadows, their movements silent and coordinated, their weapons trained on the warehouse's few points of entry. I had given them their orders, and now it was time to execute. "Alpha Team, status," I murmured into my earpiece, my voice barely above a whisper. "Alpha in position north side," came the reply. 2 tangos visible through the ground floor windows. Both stationary, appears to be eating breakfast. "Beta Team." Beta in position east side. 1 tango on the loading dock, smoking. No sign of the package. "Gamma Team." Gamma in position west side. Clear sight line to the 2nd floor office. Package is visible through the window. She's sitting on a cot. Appears unharmed, but she's crying. The confirmation that Mia was alive sent a surge of relief through me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was terrified, alone, and surrounded by the men who had torn her from her family. I thought of Donato, of the agony he must have been feeling for months, the desperate love that had driven him to betray everything he held dear. I couldn't condemn him for that, not anymore. I could only try to make it right. "Execute," I ordered. Clean and quiet. The next minute unfolded in a symphony of controlled violence. Alpha Team breached through a side door, their silenced weapons taking down the 2 guards in the ground floor with brutal efficiency. The shots were barely audible over the distant rumble of a passing truck, the bodies collapsing soundlessly onto the grimy floor. Beta team followed, moving like wraiths through the loading bay, neutralizing the guard on the dock before he could even drop his cigarette. I moved with them, my own weapon drawn, my senses heightened to a razor's edge. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of rotting crates and abandoned machinery, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. I navigated the obstacles with practiced ease, my eyes scanning for threats, my ears attuned to the faintest sound of movement. "What do we have?" I asked into the earpiece. "2 more tangos on the second floor," Gamma reported. "They're stationed at the top of the spiral staircase. They have eyes on the package, but they don't seem to realize we're here yet. We have a clean shot, but the angle is tricky. One wrong move, and they could reach the package before we take them down." "Hold your fire," I said, making a snap decision. "I'll handle it." I found the spiral staircase at the back of the warehouse, its metal steps creaking ominously under my weight as I ascended. The 2 guards were visible at the top, their backs to me, their attention focused on the door that led to the office where Mia was being held. They were young, barely out of their teens, their weapons held loosely in hands that had probably never fired them in anger. They were amateurs, hired muscle who had no idea what they had gotten themselves into. I moved up the last few steps with silent precision, my knife already in my hand. The first guard went down without a sound, the blade sliding between his ribs and piercing his heart before he could even draw breath. The second started to turn, confusion flickering across his face, but I was faster. My hand clamping over his mouth as the knife found its target, I lowered the body to the ground, my movements measured and controlled. The door to the office was directly in front of me, a cheap wooden barrier that offered little protection to the people on the other side. I didn't bother with stealth, kicking it open with a force that sent it crashing against the wall. The sight that greeted me was one that would haunt me for years. Mia was huddled on a rusted cot, her face streaked with tears, her thin body shaking with sobs. She was wearing the pink dress I had seen in the satellite images, now stained and torn, her bare feet dirty and bruised. But it wasn't her injuries that made my blood run cold. It was the man standing over her, a knife pressed to her throat, his eyes wild with a desperation that had turned him into a cornered animal. "Don't come any closer," he snarled, his hand trembling as he pressed the blade against Mia's skin. "I swear to God, I'll cut her throat." I stopped, raising my hand slowly, my weapon still in my grip. The man was in his 40s, balding, his cheap suit stained with sweat and grime. He was a middle manager, probably, a functionary who had been tasked with the dirty work of guarding the hostage while the real players attended to more important business. He was terrified, and terrified men were unpredictable. "There's no need for that," I said, my voice calm and measured. "You're not going to hurt her. You're not going to hurt anyone. Put the knife down, and you'll walk out of here alive." "I don't believe you," he said, his voice cracking. "You're going to kill me the second I let her go." "You're right," I said, surprising him with my honesty. "I probably am going to kill you, but I'm going to give you a choice. You can let her go, and I'll make it quick. Or you can hurt her, and I'll make it last for days. I've got a whole room in my basement, state-of-the-art equipment, very specialized tools. You wouldn't believe what I can do with a pair of pliers." The man's face went pale, his grip on the knife loosening slightly. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the desperate search for a way out. He wasn't a true believer, not like the Volkovs or the other architects of the conspiracy. He was just a hired hand, a man who had been paid to do a job and was now facing the consequences of his choices. "Please," Mia whimpered, her voice a broken whisper. "Please don't hurt me." Her words seemed to break the spell that held the man frozen in place. His eyes flickered to her face, and for a moment, I saw something human in his expression, a flicker of shame that momentarily overrode his fear. It was all the opening I needed, and I moved in a blur of motion, crossing the distance between us before he could react, my hand clamping down on his wrist and twisting the knife from his grip. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of surprise and pain, and I sent him crashing to the ground with a single, brutal punch to the face. He lay there, groaning, blood streaming from his nose, and I could see that he had been knocked cold. Mia was still crying, her hands clutching at her throat as if she could still feel the phantom press of the blade. I knelt beside her, my voice softening as I reached out to touch her shoulder. "It's okay," I said. "You're safe now. I'm here to take you home." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and disbelieving. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My name is Alessio," I said. "And I'm a friend of your father's."
He's been so worried about you, Mia.
"He's been trying to find you every single day. And now you're going to see him again. I promise." Mia's small hand was trembling in mine as we descended the spiral staircase, her steps hesitant and uncertain. I kept my pace slow, measured, giving her time to adjust to the sudden shift in her reality. The warehouse, which had been a prison for days, was now just a decrepit building full of memories she would spend years trying to forget. Behind us, my men were securing the scene, gathering evidence, and ensuring that no loose ends remained. The man who had held the knife to her throat was being dragged out, still unconscious, to face whatever fate I deemed appropriate. The fresh air hit us as we emerged from the building, the gray morning sky offering no warmth but promising a new beginning. Mia flinched at the sudden brightness, raising her free hand to shield her eyes, and I felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it nearly took my breath away. She was just a child, innocent and fragile, caught in a world that had no mercy for the weak. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Somewhere safe," I replied, guiding her toward the black SUV waiting at the edge of the lot. "Somewhere no one will ever hurt you again. Your father is there, waiting for you."
He's been so worried, Mia.
"He hasn't stopped thinking about you since the day you were taken." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks once more. "Daddy," she whispered, the word carrying a weight of longing and relief that pierced through even my hardened heart. I helped her into the back seat of the vehicle, buckling her seatbelt with hands that were steadier than I felt. I climbed into the passenger seat, leaving the driving to one of my men. The SUV pulled away from the warehouse, leaving behind the grim reality of Red Hook and heading toward the sanctuary of my estate. Mia stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, her small body still shaking with the aftershocks of her ordeal. I wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort that might ease her pain, but I knew that the only thing that would truly help was the embrace of her father. So I stayed silent, watching over her like a silent guardian, ready to intervene if she needed anything. The drive passed in a blur of urban decay and suburban sprawl, the landscape shifting from the industrial grid of Brooklyn to the manicured lawns of Westchester County. Mia had fallen into a fitful sleep by the time we reached the gates of my estate, her head lolling against the window, her face peaceful for the first time since I had found her. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, a brief respite from the constant vigilance that defined my existence. She was safe. That was enough for now. Donato was waiting in the grand foyer, his face a mask of barely contained anguish. The moment he saw Mia being led through the door, he rushed forward, collapsing to his knees and pulling her into his arms. His sobs echoed through the marble hall, raw and unashamed, a catharsis that had been building for months. Mia clung to him, her small fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt as if she would never let go. "You're okay," Donato whispered, his voice broken and choked with tears. "You're okay, baby. Daddy's here. Daddy's got you." I stood to the side, watching the reunion with a mixture of emotions that I struggled to name. There was relief, certainly, and satisfaction at a job well done. But there was also something else, something that had been stirring in me since Leo's whispered warning at the party. It was a longing, a quiet ache for something I had never allowed myself to have, a family, a connection, a reason to fight that went beyond the pursuit of power and wealth. I pushed the thought aside, burying it beneath the layers of pragmatism that had kept me alive for so long. There was still work to be done, enemies to crush, and a conspiracy to unravel. I couldn't afford to be distracted by sentimental fantasies. "Get them both to the guest quarters," I ordered, gesturing to a pair of my staff. "Fresh clothes, hot food, anything they need. And have a doctor look at the girl. I want to make sure she's not injured." Donato looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, his face a ruin of gratitude and shame. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "You don't have to repay me," I replied, my voice flat and emotionless. "You just have to finish what you started. I need everything you know about the Volkovs and their operation. Every safe house, every contact, every weakness. We're going to dismantle them piece by piece until there's nothing left." "I understand," he said, rising to his feet with Mia still clinging to his hand. "I'll tell you everything. I swear it." I nodded, satisfied, and turned away, leaving them to their reunion. The hallway stretched before me, empty and silent, a path that led to the command center and the next phase of my campaign. But before I could take more than a few steps, I felt a small hand on my sleeve, tugging me to a halt. I looked down to find Leo standing beside me, his dark eyes wide and serious. His mother, Clara, was hovering behind him, her face a mixture of apology and concern, but the boy seemed determined to speak his piece. "Mr. Alessio," he said, his voice high and earnest. "Is the little girl okay? Is she with her daddy now?" I knelt down, bringing myself to his eye level, and allowed myself a rare, genuine smile. "Yes, Leo," I said. "She's with her daddy now. She's safe. And it's all because of you. If you hadn't warned me about the bad men, she might not be here. You were very brave." Leo's face lit up with a grin that was missing a front tooth, pure and uncomplicated. "I was brave," he repeated, as if tasting the words for the first time. "Like a superhero." "Exactly like a superhero," I agreed, ruffling his hair. "And heroes deserve rewards. What do you want?" "Anything at all, and it's yours." He thought about it for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked up at me, his eyes bright with excitement. "A castle," he announced. "A castle with a dragon." I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in years, the tension of the past days finally breaking for just a moment. "A castle with a dragon," I repeated. "I'll see what I can do." The war room was alive with the cold, electric hum of strategy. Maps of the city covered the walls, marked with red pins and intersecting lines that traced the Volkov's network like a spider's web. My analysts moved between workstations, their fingers flying across keyboards, pulling up financial records, surveillance footage, and communication intercepts that painted a detailed picture of my enemy's operations. The information Donato had provided was the key, a master key that unlocked every door I needed to kick down. I stood at the center of it all, my arms crossed, my gaze fixed on the main screen where a list of targets scrolled in neat, orderly columns. The Volkovs had been busy, expanding their influence through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and outright violence. They had infiltrated my supply chains, turned my contacts, and built a shadow network that was poised to strike the moment I was removed from the picture. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated me, Reyes, I said, my voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the room. "Give me the rundown on the safe houses." She stepped forward, a tablet in her hand, her face composed and professional. "We've identified 7 primary locations," she reported, swiping through images on the screen. 3 in Brooklyn, 2 in Queens, 1 in the Bronx, and 1 here in Westchester. Each one is staffed by a rotating crew of Volkov operatives, ranging from 4 to 8 men. They're used for storage, meetings, and in some cases, holding hostages. We believe they're using the one in Westchester as their primary command center. "Any secondary locations?" I asked. "Bolt holes, emergency escapes." 2, she replied. 1 in Jersey City, 1 in Staten Island. Both are small, low profile, designed to be used if they need to disappear quickly. They're not expecting us to know about them, which gives us a tactical advantage. "Good," I said, a cold smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "I want simultaneous strikes on all 7 safe houses. Hit them at the same time. Don't give them a chance to coordinate or escape. Leave the Jersey City and Staten Island locations for now. We'll use them as bait later." "What about the command center?" Reyes asked. "The one in Westchester. I'll handle that one personally," I said, the smile fading into something harder. more dangerous. I want to look Dimitri Volkov in the eye before I end him. The planning sessions stretched into the evening, every detail of the operation scrutinized and refined. I was relentless, demanding perfection from my team, pushing them to anticipate every possible contingency. The stakes were too high for anything less. The Volkovs had come into my city, threatened my people, and conspired to destroy everything I had built. They had used a child as a bargaining chip, and in doing so, they had signed their own death warrants. It was late when I finally left the command center, the corridors of my estate empty and silent. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the day was beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that I couldn't afford to indulge. But before I could retreat to my private quarters, I found myself drawn to the guest wing, my steps carrying me toward the rooms where Clara and Leo had been staying. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the darkened hallway. I pushed it open slowly, careful not to make a sound, and found Clara seated in a chair by the window, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. Leo was asleep in the bed behind her, his small body curled under the covers, his thumb tucked into his mouth. Clara looked up as I entered, a flicker of surprise crossing her features before she masked it with the calm professionalism she always maintained in my presence. "Mr. Alessio," she said, rising to her feet. "I didn't expect you. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you and Leo have everything you need." "We have more than enough," she replied, a hint of warmth creeping into her voice. "This is more than we could have ever dreamed of. You've been so generous, Mr. Alessio. I don't know how to thank you." "Clara," I said, stepping closer, "you don't have to thank me. It's your son who should be thanked. If he hadn't warned me about the bomb, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I owe him my life." She looked down, her cheeks flushing with a mix of pride and embarrassment. "He's a good boy," she said. "He always notices things, the little details that other people miss. It's almost like he can see the world differently, like he senses danger before it arrives. Then he's a rare gift," I said, my gaze drifting to the sleeping child. "And I think you are too, Clara. You've been with me for 5 years, and I've never once questioned your loyalty. In a world full of betrayal, that means more than you can imagine." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, and I saw something flicker in their depths, a vulnerability she usually kept hidden. "I would never betray you, Mr. Alessio," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've given us a chance, a home, a life we never thought we'd have. Leo and I were loyal to you, always." I reached out, my hand brushing against her arm in a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but lingered longer than it should have. "I know," I said. "And I want you to know that I consider you part of my family now. Both of you. You'll always have a place here, no matter what." The words hung in the air between us, charged with a significance that neither of us was ready to fully acknowledge. Clara's breath caught, her lips parting slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might say something more. But then Leo stirred in his sleep, a soft murmur escaping his lips, and the spell was broken. "I should let you rest," I said, stepping back. "It's been a long day for all of us. We'll talk more tomorrow." "Good night, Mr. Alessio," Clara said, her voice steady despite the emotions flickering in her eyes. "Good night," I replied, and I slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, my heart beating faster than it had any right to. The feeling that had stirred in me earlier, the longing for connection that I had spent years suppressing, was now impossible to ignore. Clara and Leo had awakened something in me, something I thought had died long ago. And as I made my way to my own quarters, I realized that I wanted to protect them not just as a responsibility, but as a choice. The war against the Volkovs was still my priority. But for the first time in years, I had something else to fight for as well. The night before the strike, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind churning through the details of the operation with the relentless precision of a machine. Every variable had been accounted for, every contingency planned, every route of escape sealed. My team was ready, loyal to the bone, eager to deliver the retribution that had been building for months. And yet, something gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, a whisper of doubt that I couldn't quite silence. I rose from the bed, the silk sheets cool against my skin, and padded across the room to the window. The estate grounds stretched out below, bathed in the silver light of a waning moon. The security lights cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, and I could see the faint silhouettes of my guards patrolling the perimeter, vigilant as always. It was a scene of perfect order, a fortress designed to keep out the chaos of the world beyond. But chaos had already found its way inside, and it had worn the face of the woman I had planned to marry. Celeste had been moved to a secure location, a facility I had built specifically for the containment of high-value prisoners. I had not visited her since the night of the party, and I had given strict orders that she was to be treated with the cold professionalism that her crimes deserved. She was not to be harmed, not yet. I wanted to look her in the eye when I finally confronted her, to hear her justify the betrayal that had shattered the last remnants of my trust in humanity. But as I stood at the window, watching the moon trace its slow arc across the sky, I found my thoughts drifting not to Celeste, but to Clara. The memory of her face in the lamplight, the vulnerability in her eyes, the way her voice had trembled when she spoke of loyalty. It was a dangerous path, I knew, allowing myself to feel anything for anyone in this world. Attachments were weaknesses, vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. I had learned that lesson the hard way, had buried too many friends and loved ones to ever forget it. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was different. She had been in my employ for 5 years, had seen the darkest parts of my life, had witnessed the violence and brutality that I wielded to maintain my power. And she had never flinched, never judged, never tried to use what she knew for her own advantage. She was a rare soul in a world of predators, a woman who had managed to hold onto her humanity despite everything she had seen. I thought of Leo, the boy who had saved my life, with a whispered warning. He was so young, so innocent, with no idea of the forces that swirled around him. He had seen the bad men, had sensed the danger they represented, and he had acted on instinct, driven by a courage that most adults never possessed. His future was a blank slate, a canvas waiting to be painted with whatever colors life chose to bestow. And I found myself wanting to protect that future, to shield him from the darkness that had consumed so much of my own existence. The hours passed in a haze of restless contemplation, and when the first pale fingers of dawn began to creep across the horizon, I was already dressed, already prepared for the day ahead. The operation would begin at first light, a coordinated strike that would dismantle the Volkov's network in a single, devastating blow. I had chosen the timing deliberately, knowing that my enemies would be at their most vulnerable, their guards lowered by the false security of a night. I met my team in the command center, their faces a mix of grim determination and barely contained excitement. They were soldiers, every one of them, warriors who had been forged in the fires of countless battles. They trusted me, believed in me, and I would not let them down. Positions, I said, my voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Execute on my signal. The screen in front of me displayed a dozen live feeds, each one showing a different team poised to strike. I watched the seconds tick by, my finger hovering over the button that would set the plan in motion. The anticipation was electric, a current that crackled through the room and made the air itself seem to hum with potential. Now, I said, and I pressed the button. The feeds erupted into action, my teams moving with synchronized precision. The Volkov's safe houses were breached, the guards neutralized, the evidence secured. I watched the chaos unfold with a cold, clinical detachment, noting the efficiency of each operation, the way my men handled every challenge with practiced ease. It was a masterpiece of planning and execution, a symphony of violence that left nothing to chance. But my attention was fixed on the feed that showed the Westchester Command Center, the heart of the Volkov's operations. I watched as my team breached the perimeter, their movements swift and silent. I watched as they cleared the ground floor, taking down the guards with a speed that left no room for counterattack. And I watched as they reached the top floor, where Dimitri Volkov was waiting, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, I didn't wait for my team to secure him. I left the command center and made my way to the waiting helicopter, the rotors already spinning in the early morning light. The flight to Westchester was short, a blur of green countryside and winding roads that passed beneath me in seconds. When I landed, I strode into the command center, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Dimitri Volkov was on his knees, his hands bound behind his back, his face bloodied and bruised. He looked up at me as I entered, and I saw the fear in his eyes, the recognition that his reign was over. "Alessio," he said, his voice trembling despite his attempts to steady it. "I should have known you'd survive. You always do. You should have known better than to cross me," I replied, my voice cold and flat. "But you were too arrogant, too blinded by your own ambition to see the truth. You thought you could take what was mine, destroy everything I've built, and walk away unscathed. You were wrong." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "And what are you going to do? Kill me? My people will never stop hunting you. They'll tear you apart piece by piece. Your people are either dead or in custody," I said, crouching down to meet his gaze. "Your safe houses are gone, your resources are seized, your empire is in ruins. There's nothing left for them to fight for. The only thing that's left is you." I rose to my feet, turning away from him as if he were already forgotten. But I paused at the door, looking back over my shoulder. "You will face justice for what you did, Dimitri. For the lives you threatened, for the families you destroyed, for the child you held hostage. And I will be there to watch you fall." I left him there, on his knees, his fate sealed. The hunt was over, the prey captured. But the war was far from finished, and I had no intention of resting until every last trace of the Volkovs' influence had been erased from my city. The holding facility was a converted industrial building on the outskirts of the city, its exterior unremarkable, its interior a maze of reinforced steel and electronic surveillance. It was here that I kept my most dangerous prisoners, the ones who required special handling, the ones who could not be allowed to see the light of day again. Celeste was in the deepest cell, a room stripped of all comfort, designed to break even the strongest will. I had been avoiding this confrontation for days, but now, with the Volkov network in ruins and Dimitri securely in custody, there was no more time for delay. I walked through the corridor, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls, the guards snapping to attention as I passed. The cell door was a slab of steel, featureless and cold, and I paused in front of it, steeling myself for what was to come. Celeste had been the love of my life, the woman I had trusted with my secrets, my heart, my future. And she had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the small, barren room beyond. Celeste was sitting on the edge of the cot, her posture rigid, her face a mask of defiance. She had been here for days now, isolated from the world, stripped of her makeup and designer clothes, her hair lank and unwashed. But even in her current state, there was a fire in her eyes that I recognized, the same fire that had first attracted me to her. "Alessio," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Finally decided to come and gloat." "Gloat," I repeated, stepping into the room and letting the door slide shut behind me. "Is that what you think this is, a victory lap? What else would you call it?" she asked, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "You've won. You've crushed the Volkovs, destroyed their network, taken everything they had. You've proven once again that you're the most powerful man in the city. I'm sure you're very proud of yourself." I walked toward her, my steps slow and deliberate, my gaze never leaving her face. "I came here to understand," I said. "I came here to hear you tell me why. Why did you do it? Celeste, why did you throw away everything we had for a handful of Volkov gold and a seat at a table that will never exist?" Her composure cracked, just slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her features before she suppressed it. "You really don't know, do you?" she said, her voice rising with a bitterness that had been festering for years. "You think this was about money, about power. You think I care about any of that. Then what was it about?" I demanded, my voice finally rising to match hers. "What could possibly justify what you did?" she laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that echoed off the walls. "You," she said, pointing a trembling finger at me.
It was always about you.
The way you treated me like a trophy, a pretty accessory to be displayed at your parties and then ignored. The way you never truly let me in, never trusted me with the real you. I was always on the outside, looking in no matter how close I got. I stared at her, my anger warring with a grudging acknowledgement of the truth in her words. I had kept her at a distance, had never fully opened myself to her, always protecting the vulnerable parts of myself that I had learned to hide. It wasn't intentional, not entirely, but the result was the same. I had made her feel like an outsider, and that feeling had festered until it turned into something dark and destructive. That doesn't justify what you did, I said, my voice quieter now. You could have walked away. You could have ended things between us without trying to destroy me. Walk away, she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. Walk away from the wealth, the power, the life you gave me. You think I could have gone back to being nobody after tasting all of this? You don't understand what it's like to be invisible, Alessio. You've never been invisible a day in your life. I had no answer for that because she was right. I had been born with nothing, but I had clawed my way to the top through sheer force of will. I had always been seen, always been a force to be reckoned with. I had never known what it was like to be dismissed, to be overlooked, to feel like you didn't matter. And perhaps, in some twisted way, that was what had driven Celeste to such extremes. You have a choice now, I said, my voice heavy with the weight of finality. You can spend the rest of your life in this cell, forgotten by the world, or you can tell me everything you know about the Volkovs' remaining allies. Give me something to work with, and I'll consider letting you go. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of deception. You'd let me walk free after everything I've done? I said I'd consider it. I replied, that's the best offer you're going to get. She was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint hum of the ventilation system. Then, slowly, she began to speak, her voice low and steady, reciting names and locations with the precision of someone who had been hoarding secrets for months. I listened, my mind cataloging every detail, knowing that this information could be the key to rooting out the last remnants of the conspiracy. When she finished, I stood up, moving toward the door. You'll be moved to a different facility, I said, not looking back. Not exactly comfortable, but better than this. I'll keep my end of the bargain if you keep yours. Alessio, she said, her voice stopping me in my tracks. I turned, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had once loved, the vulnerability she had always hidden beneath her armor. I'm sorry, she said, the words barely audible. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at her, the weight of everything we had lost hanging between us like a ghost. Neither did I said, and then I walked out, the door sliding shut behind me with a final, irrevocable click. As I made my way back through the corridor, the information Celeste had given me already churning through my mind, I felt something I hadn't expected, a sense of closure. The betrayal still hurt, the wound still raw, but the confrontation had given me answers I hadn't realized I needed. And now, with the truth laid bare, I could finally begin to move on. The weeks that followed were a blur of consolidation and reconstruction. The Volkov network had been dismantled piece by piece, their allies scattered or neutralized, their influence in the city reduced to ash. Dimitri Volkov had been handed over to the authorities, his crimes documented with enough evidence to ensure he would never see the outside of a prison cell again. The remnants of his organization had crumbled, leaderless and directionless, easy prey for my operatives who swept through the underworld like a cleansing fire. But for all the victories, for all the blood and sacrifice that had gone into securing my empire, I found myself increasingly detached from the world I had built. The hunger for power that had driven me for so long had begun to fade, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. The confrontations with Donato and Celeste had left me raw, exposed in ways I hadn't anticipated. And the presence of Clara and Leo in my life had shifted something fundamental, a tectonic change that I was only beginning to understand. I found myself spending more time in the guest wing, watching Leo play with the toys I had ordered for him, listening to Clara's soft laughter as she read him stories. The boy had taken to calling me Mr. Alessio, the honorific carrying a weight of respect that touched something deep within me. He was fearless, curious, always asking questions about the world around him. And he had a way of looking at me, a frank, open gaze that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, I found them in the garden, a small oasis of green behind the estate. Leo was chasing butterflies, his small legs pumping as he darted across the lawn, his laughter echoing off the high stone walls. Clara was seated on a bench, her face tilted toward the sun, a peaceful smile playing at her lips. She looked up as I approached, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "Mr. Alessio," she said, rising to her feet. "I didn't expect to see you out here. Don't you have business to attend to?" "The business can wait," I said, settling onto the bench beside her. "I wanted to see how you were both settling in. Is there anything you need?" "We have everything we could possibly want," she replied, her voice soft and genuine. "You've been more than generous, Mr. Alessio. I don't know how to thank you." "You've thanked me enough," I said, my gaze drifting to Leo, who was now crouched in the grass, examining a flower with intense concentration. "Your son saved my life, Clara. There's no gift I could give you that would repay that debt." She was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "He talks about it sometimes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bad men, the scary clock. He has nightmares sometimes. But he always says that you were there, that you protected him. He looks up to you, Mr. Alessio. He thinks you're a hero." I felt a lump form in my throat, an unfamiliar sensation that I quickly suppressed. "I'm not a hero," I said, my voice gruff. "I'm just a man who does what needs to be done. That's what heroes do, isn't it?" Clara asked, turning to look at me with those steady, knowing eyes. "They do what needs to be done, even when it's hard, even when it costs them something." I had no answer for that, so I simply sat in silence, watching Leo chase his butterflies, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in its ordinariness, but it felt more precious to me than any victory I had ever won. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I began to make changes, small at first, then more significant. I delegated more responsibility to my trusted lieutenants, freeing myself from the endless demands of running an empire. I spent more time at the estate, more time with Clara and Leo, more time simply being present in my own life. It was a slow process, a gradual unwinding of the armor I had worn for so long, but it was also liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I also made time for Donato and Mia. The guilt of his betrayal had been weighing on him, but I had seen the genuine remorse in his eyes, the desperate love that had driven him to make choices he would never forgive himself for. I gave him a second chance, not out of sentiment, but because I believed that redemption was possible for those who truly sought it. He worked alongside me now, rebuilding his life one day at a time, and I watched with quiet satisfaction as he slowly found his way back. One evening, I stood on the terrace of the estate, watching the sun set over the city I had fought so hard to control. The sky was a canvas of orange and gold, the buildings silhouetted against the fading light. It was a view I had seen 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different, more vibrant, more alive. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Clara approaching, Leo's hand in hers. The boy was clutching a small, hand-drawn picture, his face bright with excitement. "Mr. Alessio," he said, holding out the picture. "I made this for you. It's you and me and my mommy, and we're all in a castle. The dragon is there too, but he's nice. He's our friend." I took the drawing, my fingers tracing the crude shapes of stick figures and a dragon with a friendly smile. It was a simple thing, a child's art, but it was also the most precious gift I had ever received. "Thank you, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This is the best castle I've ever seen." His face lit up with a grin, and I felt something shift inside me, a warmth that I had long forgotten. I looked up at Clara, and she was smiling too, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is your home now," I said, my voice firm with conviction. "Both of you, and I'll protect it with everything I have." And as I stood there, the drawing clutched in my hand, the sun setting behind me, I knew that my life had changed in ways I could never have imagined. I was still the most powerful man in the city, still a force to be reckoned with. But I was also something else, something I had never allowed myself to be. I was part of a family. And that was a victory worth more than any empire I could ever build. The garden had become my sanctuary, a place where the weight of empire fell away and I could simply exist. I sat on the same stone bench where I had first allowed myself to feel something other than ambition, watching Leo chase fireflies across the lawn as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and rose. Clara was beside me, her presence a quiet comfort that had become essential to my daily existence. "Look, Mr. Alessio," Leo called out, his small hands cupped around a glowing insect. I caught a star. I smiled, a genuine smile that no longer felt foreign on my face. "That's not a star, little one. That's a firefly. But I think it's just as magical, don't you?" He nodded solemnly, opening his hands to let the creature fly free, its light blinking in the gathering darkness. He ran off again, his laughter trailing behind him like music, and I felt Clara's hand brush against mine. "He adores you, you know," she said softly. "He talks about you constantly. He thinks you're the bravest man in the world." I turned to look at her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the garden lights. "And what do you think?" I asked, the question carrying more weight than I intended, as she met my gaze, her eyes steady and warm. "I think you're a man who has been hurt more than he shows. A man who has built walls so high that he forgot how to let people in. But I also think you're a man who is learning to tear those walls down. And that takes more courage than anything else I've ever seen." The words settled into my chest, a warmth that spread through me like a slow fire. I reached out, my hand covering hers, and she didn't pull away. We sat in comfortable silence, watching Leo play, the weight of the past months slowly lifting from my shoulders. The city could wait. The empire could wait. Everything I had built, everything I had fought for, all of it would still be there tomorrow. But moments like this, moments of quiet connection, of simple humanity, were fleeting. And I had learned, through loss and betrayal and hard-won redemption, that they were the only things that truly mattered. "Clara," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I can be the man you deserve. But I want to try. I want to try to be better, to let people in, to build something that isn't just made of power and fear." She squeezed my hand, her smile soft and understanding. "That's all any of us can do, Alessio.
Try.
And I think for the first time in a long time you're ready to do just that." The fireflies danced around us, a constellation of small lights against the darkening sky, and I realized that this was what I had been missing all along. Not power, not wealth, not the fear and respect of my enemies. Just this, a moment of peace, of connection, of love. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would protect it with everything I had. Leo came running back, his face flushed with excitement, and he threw his arms around my waist, hugging me tightly. "I love you, Mr. Alessio," he said, his voice muffled against my shirt. "Will you stay with us forever?" I knelt down, pulling him into a proper embrace, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine. "Yes, little one," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll stay with you forever. I promise." And as the stars emerged overhead, one by one, I knew that I had finally found my place in the world. Not as a king of the underworld, but as a protector, a guardian, a father. The redemption I had sought was not in revenge, but in this simple, sacred gift of belonging. And I would treasure it for all the days of my life.